The morning my father told me I was no longer his son, I was standing in the kitchen holding a cup of coffee I'd just poured for him. It wasn't a dramatic confrontation. There was no screaming, no thrown dishes, no storm rolling in through the windows. He just looked at me across the granite island, the same island where my mother used to help me with science projects when I was 9, and said it like he was canceling a subscription. Calm, final. Already done in his mind before the words even left his mouth. "You made your choice," he said. "Now live with it." The choice he was referring to was my brother. My younger brother, Donnie, who was 22 and had just been released from a county jail in Georgia after a DUI that left a woman in the hospital with a broken collarbone. I had posted his bail. I had driven 400 miles to pick him up. And when I brought him home, to our home, the house on Fenwick Road where we'd both grown up, my father looked at me like I'd tracked mud across something sacred. "He made a mistake," I said. "He's made 17 mistakes," my father replied. "And every time you help him, you make one too." I didn't argue. I had learned long ago that arguing with my father was like arguing with the tide. You could plant your feet and push back all you wanted, but the water didn't care. It just kept coming, cold and indifferent, until you were the one who moved. What I didn't expect was what came next. He told me to pack whatever fit in my car. He told me that if I wanted to be Donnie's keeper, I could do it somewhere else. He told me, and this is the part I still hear sometimes at 3 in the morning, that I had wasted every opportunity he had given me, and that he was done throwing good money after bad. I was 24 years old. I had a bachelor's degree in business administration, $1,100 in savings, and a 2009 Honda Accord with a cracked rear bumper. Donnie was asleep in the guest room upstairs, still wearing the clothes he'd been arrested in. I left the coffee on the counter. I didn't even finish packing properly. I just grabbed my duffel bag, stuffed it with whatever was on top, and walked out the front door into a Tuesday afternoon in late October that felt nothing like October. Cold gray sky, leaves already stripped from the trees, the whole world looking like it had given up early. Donnie came with me. He didn't have anywhere else to go either. For the first 2 weeks, we stayed in a motel off the interstate that charged by the week and smelled like cigarettes and industrial cleaner. We split the cost. I picked up shifts at a hardware store where a guy I knew from high school was a shift manager. Donnie applied to 23 jobs and got callbacks from 2 of them, and took the one that called back first, a warehouse position that paid slightly above minimum wage and started at 5 in the morning. We didn't talk much about our father, not directly. We talked around it, the way you talk around a bruise. You know it's there, you know exactly where it is, you just don't press on it, because you already know what pressing on it feels like. What we did talk about, sometimes late at night when neither of us could sleep, and the highway traffic outside sounded like distant water, was our grandfather. My grandfather, my father's father, had died the previous spring. His name was Leonard. Everyone called him Leo. He had been a civil engineer who retired early and spent the last 20 years of his life on a piece of land he owned in the hill country of central Virginia, about 60 miles from Charlottesville. The land had a farmhouse on it that he'd renovated himself, a small barn he used as a workshop, and, somewhere on the property, exactly where, none of us had ever been entirely sure, a second structure that he'd built with his own hands in his mid-60s. A storage cabin, my father had called it dismissively. A bunker, Donnie always said, because it sounded better. My grandfather had never invited us to see it. He'd mentioned it exactly once, at a Christmas dinner 6 years before he died, when Donnie had asked him what he kept out there. Leo had looked at him over his glasses for a long moment and said, "Things that need keeping." Then he'd passed the sweet potatoes and changed the subject. When he died, my father had handled the estate, or claimed to handle it. The farmhouse had been sold within 3 months. Fast, we thought at the time, but my father said the market was good and the decision was obvious. The land itself, technically, had been transferred to my father's name pending some kind of probate process that he said was being handled by attorneys. He had told us not to worry about it. He told us that often, about money, about property, about anything that might have required us to ask questions. Don't worry about it. I'm handling it. You wouldn't understand. But there was one thing my father had not handled, or at least had not mentioned handling, and it was the thing Donnie brought up on a Thursday night in November while we were eating gas station sandwiches in our motel room and watching the local news. Leo never gave up the cabin, Donnie said, out of nowhere. I looked at him. What? The cabin on the back of the property. It wasn't part of the farmhouse sale. I looked it up. The parcel was subdivided back in 2019. The cabin sits on its own half-acre. It's still, technically, in Leo's name. I put down my sandwich. How do you know that? He pulled up the county assessor's website on his phone and showed me. There it was, a half-acre parcel in Nelson County, Virginia. Owner, Leonard J. Marsh. Last tax payment, current. I stared at the screen for a long time. Someone's been paying the property taxes, I said. Not Dad, Donnie said. I checked. They come out of a separate account. A trust account, I think, attached to a law office in Charlottesville. I can't see the details, but I can see that the payments are still being made. I set the phone down on the comforter between us. Leo set something up, I said. Donnie nodded slowly. Before he died. We drove out the following Saturday. The road into the property was a 1.5 miles of unpaved gravel that Google Maps didn't fully recognize. We passed through what had once been the main gate, now just 2 concrete posts with no gate between them, and then wound through a corridor of old-growth Virginia pine until the gravel widened into a rough clearing. The farmhouse was gone, obviously. New owners, new life, but on the far edge of the clearing, where the land dipped toward a dry creek bed and then rose again into a stand of hardwoods, there was a structure. It was smaller than I'd imagined. Single-story, rough-hewn lumber siding that had gone silver-gray with age. A metal roof that had rusted at the seams but was still structurally intact. The door was steel core. I could tell by the weight of it when Donnie tried to push, set into a reinforced frame. There were 2 windows, both shuttered from the inside, and there was a padlock on the door that was not cheap, not decorative, and not old. That padlock had been replaced recently. Maybe within the last year. Someone's been here, I said. Donnie looked at it. Or Leo planned ahead. We didn't have a key. We hadn't thought that far. I stood there in the gray November cold, feeling ridiculous, and then Donnie said, "Check under the eave," which was exactly the kind of thing Leo would have done. Not because he was naive, but because he believed that things worth finding were usually within reach if you knew where to look. I checked under the eave on the left side. Nothing. I checked the right side. There was a small metal hook screwed into the beam, painted the same color as the wood, and hanging on it, wrapped in a piece of oilskin cloth, was a key. I took it down. My hands were cold enough that I fumbled with the lock twice before it turned. The door swung inward. It smelled like cedar and machine oil, and something faintly sweet I couldn't name, maybe old paper, maybe sawdust. A single bare bulb hung from the center of the ceiling, connected to a solar battery pack mounted on the wall. Donnie found the switch. The bulb came on, warm and amber, and we stood in the doorway and took stock of what our grandfather had built. It was one room, maybe 14 by 18 feet. The walls were lined with deep shelving, floor to ceiling on 3 sides, filled with the careful, organized possessions of a man who had spent a lifetime thinking about what mattered. There were tools, neatly hung, camping and survival equipment, still packaged, a shortwave radio, a water filtration system, cases of freeze-dried food stacked in the far corner, a cot, folded, a kerosene heater with 2 full canisters beside it. It was, in every practical sense, a lifeboat, and at the center of the back wall, built into the shelving like it had grown there, was a steel cabinet with a combination lock. The cabinet was bolted through the wall studs. It wasn't going anywhere without a cutting torch. On the shelf directly above the cabinet, propped against the wall with a small river rock holding it in place, was an envelope. My name was on the front, and Donnie's, written together in Leo's careful drafting school handwriting. Walter and Donald. My hands were steadier than I expected when I picked it up. The letter was 4 pages, written on legal paper in blue ink. Leo had written it. He explained at the top, in March of the year before he died, 14 months before the stroke that took him. He had written it because, he said, he had been watching our family for a long time, and he had come to understand certain things about our father that he was not proud of. He wrote carefully. He was a careful man. He didn't accuse, he described. He said that over the course of the previous decade, he had become aware that our father, his son, had been using the family's legacy construction business, Marsh and Connolly, to inflate project costs on municipal contracts, pocket the difference through a series of shell companies, and systematically underpay the subcontractors and laborers who did the actual work. He had learned this not from documents initially, but from a man named Warren, a former site foreman at the company who had come to Leo's door one evening, hat in hand, and laid out what he knew. Leo had spent 2 years verifying it. He wrote, "I did not go to the authorities immediately because I believed, perhaps foolishly, that your father might correct himself. He did not, and I have since concluded that waiting was a mistake I will have to live with. I am writing this now so that you, if you ever need it, will not have to make the same one." The combination to the cabinet, he wrote at the bottom of the 3rd page, was the last 4 digits of the phone number of the house on Fenwick Road, followed by the year he had earned his engineering license. Donnie knew the phone number. I remembered the year. Leo had mentioned it once at a birthday dinner, proud in the quiet way he was proud of things he'd actually built. We opened the cabinet together. Inside were 3 items. The first was a manila envelope, thick and banded, containing what appeared to be photocopies of financial documents, invoices, bank transfers, incorporation filings for 4 separate LLCs, and a printed spreadsheet that someone, Leo, presumably, had annotated by hand in red ink, columns highlighted, discrepancies circled, dates cross-referenced. The second was a USB drive taped to a folded sheet of paper. The paper had a list of file names and what each one contained, scanned originals, email correspondence, and 3 years of internal billing records that Leo had apparently obtained. The letter didn't explain how, from someone inside the company. The third was a smaller envelope, sealed, with the name of a law firm written on the front in Leo's handwriting. Underneath the name, "Do not open. Deliver directly. They are expecting it." I sat down on the floor of that cabin and read my grandfather's letter again from the beginning. He had known he was going to die. Not the timing, not the stroke, but he had known, the way old men sometimes do, that his time was shortening, and instead of spending whatever time he had left in anger or grief or confrontation, he had spent it building something, quietly, methodically, in a way that asked nothing of anyone until it was needed. He had built us a way out. The law firm was in Charlottesville. Harwick and Bale, a small civil and criminal practice on the 2nd floor of a building near the downtown mall. We drove there on a Monday morning and asked for the attorney named on the envelope, a woman named Miss Reyes, who turned out to be roughly 60 years old with reading glasses on a beaded chain and the kind of measured calm that suggested she had been expecting us and had simply been waiting to see how long it would take. She had us sit. She poured coffee without asking. She took the sealed envelope, opened it herself, read the contents, which we couldn't see, and then set it on the desk and looked at us both for a moment before she spoke. "Your grandfather retained our firm 4 years ago," she said. "He was specific about the conditions under which I was to be contacted. One of those conditions was that you, either or both of you, would come to me in a situation of need." She glanced down at the envelope. "The other condition was that you would bring this." She explained what had been arranged. Leo had placed a separate trust in our names, not large but substantial enough to matter. $190,000, split equally, accessible when we were both over 21 and the trust conditions were met. The conditions, apparently, were tied to our father's business in a way I didn't fully understand until she explained it. The trust would not release funds until the financial documentation Leo had compiled was formally submitted to the appropriate authorities. Leo had structured it that way, she said, because he wanted to make sure the money would only reach us once we had made a choice. He wasn't bribing us. He was betting on us. "He wanted to know, Miss," Reyes said quietly, that you would do the right thing even before you knew there was money attached to it. I looked at Donnie. Donnie looked at me. "What do we do with the documents?" I asked. She picked up a yellow legal pad. "That," she said, "is exactly what I'm going to help you figure out." The process took 4 months. Ms. Reyes connected us with a contact at the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just a woman named Agent Collins, who wore a gray blazer and took very detailed notes and asked us to come in 3 times for interviews over 2 months. We handed over everything: the manila envelope, the USB drive, the annotated spreadsheet. We gave them Warren's name, which Leo had included in the letter. We answered every question we were asked. Donnie and I had rented a proper apartment by then. 2 bedrooms in a building in Harrisonburg, 40 minutes from Charlottesville. I had transferred to a better job, project coordination at a mid-size contractor. Donnie had gotten a commercial driver's license and was running regional routes for a logistics company. We were not comfortable, not yet, but we were steady. We were building something. During those 4 months, we did not contact our father. We did not tell him what we had found or what we were doing. We did not respond to the 2 voicemails he left, both businesslike, both careful, both containing nothing that admitted anything, and we did not answer when he called on Thanksgiving. I thought about him, though, more than I expected to, not with anger, exactly, more with a kind of grief that didn't have a clean shape. He was my father. He had also, it turned out, been stealing from municipal contracts for at least a decade, money that came from taxpayers, that should have gone to schools and roads, and the kind of infrastructure that holds a community together. He had stolen from the workers who built things for him. He had done it carefully, methodically, for years, and he had never, as far as any of us knew, lost a moment of sleep. That's the part that's hardest to hold, not the theft, the sleep. The indictment came down on a Friday in late March. Ms. Reyes called us at 8 in the morning. She told us what to expect: federal charges, wire fraud, bid rigging, tax evasion, and then she told us something we hadn't known. Warren, the former foreman, had agreed to cooperate with investigators and had corroborated everything in Leo's documents and then some. Because of the nature of the bid rigging charges on federal contracts, there was a whistleblower provision that applied. We would receive a percentage of the recovered funds. I asked her what percentage. She told us. I had to ask her to repeat it. The number was not $190,000. The number was considerably larger. My father was arrested on a Wednesday morning at the offices of Marsh and Connolly, in front of the staff he had employed for 30 years. The local paper covered it. The regional business journal covered it more thoroughly. I read the articles on my phone sitting in my car in a parking garage in Harrisonburg, and I want to be honest about this. I felt more tired than satisfied, not vindicated, not triumphant, just tired, in the way you get tired after carrying something heavy for a very long time and finally setting it down. His attorney entered a not guilty plea. The evidence, apparently, made that posture difficult to maintain. By June, there was a deal in progress. By September, there was a sentencing date. I did not go to the sentencing. Donnie did, and he came back quiet, and we ordered pizza and watched something forgettable on TV, and neither of us talked about it much, which felt like the right call. What I did do, in August, was something that had been in the back of my mind since the night in the motel when Donnie first showed me that county assessor website. I drove back out to the property in Nelson County. I parked at the edge of the clearing and walked through the pines to the cabin. I had the key in my jacket pocket. I'd kept it, not for any particular reason, just because putting it back had felt wrong. The door opened the same as before, and the bare bulb came on with the same amber warmth, and I stood in the middle of the room and looked at the shelves my grandfather had built with his own hands. The cot, the radio, the water filtration system, the survival supplies still in their packaging, a lifeboat, built by a man who had seen something coming and refused to do nothing. I sat down on the cot for a while. I didn't cry, exactly. I just sat there in the quiet and thought about what it costs a person to do the right thing when no one is watching, and no one will ever know whether you did it or not. Leo had known. He had known that he was old and sick, and that he might not be there to make things right himself. So he had made them right in advance. He had trusted us to find it, to understand it, to carry it forward. And the trust itself, the structure of it, the condition about the money, was the most Leo thing I could imagine. He hadn't left us a rescue. He'd left us a test that happened to also be a rescue. We passed it. I think we passed it. The half-acre parcel, it turned out, passed to Donnie and me through a provision in Leo's estate that my father had apparently overlooked or simply chosen to ignore, banking on the fact that we wouldn't know to look for it. Ms. Reyes helped us navigate the paperwork. The land was ours now. The cabin was ours. We talked. In the abstract way, you talk about things that feel too big to be practical yet. About what to do with it. Donnie thought we should keep it exactly as Leo had built it. I thought maybe we should build something new, not replace the cabin, just add to the land, make it a place we could come to on purpose instead of out of desperation. We haven't decided yet. There's time. What I know is this: for most of my life, I understood my grandfather as a quiet man. Reserved, a man of routines and silences and small, precise gestures. I knew he loved us because he showed up consistently, without fanfare, at the things that mattered. Birthdays, graduations. The afternoon he drove 2 hours to sit with me in a hospital waiting room when I had an emergency appendectomy at 19, and brought a crossword puzzle book, and didn't say much, but stayed until they told us everything was fine. I didn't know, until I opened a steel cabinet in a cedar-smelling cabin in the Virginia hill country, that quiet love can also be a form of preparation. That someone can spend years building something you haven't needed yet, trusting that when you need it, you'll know what to do. Donnie called me the week after the sentencing. It was a Tuesday evening, and I was making dinner, and he said, out of nowhere, "Do you think he knew? About us specifically? Like, did he know it would be us who found it, not Dad, not some attorney?" I thought about it for a minute. "He put our names on the envelope," I said. Donnie was quiet. "Yeah," he said finally. "He did. The thing our grandfather left us wasn't the money, though the money matters. I won't pretend otherwise. It wasn't even the evidence, though the evidence was what made justice possible. It was the fact that he had looked at two kids who were always a little too much, and a little too loud, and a little too loyal to each other for our own good, and he had decided, quietly, without telling anyone, without making a production of it, that we were worth betting on, in a family where we had been told, in 100 different ways, that we were liabilities. Our grandfather had made us into assets. Not by rescuing us, by trusting us to rescue ourselves. I think about that a lot, especially on the days when things are hard, when something goes sideways at work, or I make a mistake I can't immediately fix, when the voice in the back of my head starts sounding too much like my father's. I think about an old man in a pair of work boots, building a steel cabinet in the back wall of a cabin no one could see from the road, knowing he would probably never get to explain it in person. I think about him hanging a key on a hook under the eave, where someone who knew how to look would find it. And I think, the least I can do is be someone who knows how to look.